Introductions here for the Transportation Advisory Committee, Commission appointees, and I think I'm just going to say names for them right here. And if you're here, would you please stand? Ruth Heald. Is Ruth here? Oh, we got more people. Oh, here we come. Oh, wait a minute. Here it is. Just stay standing. If you, I'm going to say your name. If you just raise your hand. Ruth Heald. Emily. Oh, Christy. I know Christy is here. Askamit. Kathleen Stepp. Jared Farringer. And Robin Bromley.
Did you mean
Robin
Emil instead of
Emil?
Whoops.
Are you Emil?
I am.
Yeah.
Oh, Emil. It says Emily on my notes. I apologize.
Thanks.
Emil.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Don't tell us that's the first time it's ever happened.
You're right.
So anyway, welcome. We appreciate you guys serving on our advisory commission. We appreciate that. And if anybody wants to say any words, introduce yourselves, that'd be great. And we usually normally do this as to just see who are on our commissions or who serve on our boards that the council is a part of. So.
I'm Ruth Heald. I work for the Casper Turner County Public Health Department in Environmental Health.
Thank you.
Kathy Stepp, most of you know me from my family's Donnell's Candies, and I'm also now with Atlantic Aviation. So,
I'm Christy Axsmith, and I grew up here in Casper, and I'm a physical therapist at an outpatient facility called Central Learning Therapy, but I've also worked all over the northwest of the United States.
Jared Farringer, work for a civil engineering company here in town. I'm a landscape architect. I was born and raised in Casper. Lived in several different places and been back here for about 6 years now. So.
Emil Gerke, retired RN, and in Casper 25 years. By choice, not birth.
Do you need a job?
That's retired.
Part-time PRN?
I can tell you he's got a job. He wears out our paths on his bicycle. 50 miles a day or something like that.
Well, we thank you guys as citizens of Casper, giving of your time and volunteering and participating in that. We appreciate that civic engagement that you guys do for us. That means a lot to us. Appreciate it. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you as well.
Thanks for coming by.
Thank you for coming by, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.
You can sit down and stay if you want to.
Go around the corner.
It's election night, they have a busy night ahead.
Wait, look,
It's not my fault.
It said Emily.
You can't bring that back either.
I know. I was just like, I just started getting hot under the collar.
I didn't know if it was the
It's like,
SC
sorry, Emil.
I think.
Let's move right along to the health fund update. Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Good evening. You all know that we have a budget amendment coming up where we're going to be asking you for some changes to our budget, and not inconsistent with years past that you've probably experienced. Usually that's the opportunity that we take to reconcile what we projected to happen to what is actually happening at the particular time of question. One of the major features of the amendment that you're going to review actually next week will be with regard to the health fund. We've had a number of conversations as a group with regard to the struggles we're having with the health fund, and the last time we met, council said, hey, bring us a recommendation with regard to what you think will be a good stopgap measure for now, and perhaps a longer term recommendation with regard to the health fund thereafter. So the stopgap measure that we would request pertaining to the health fund would be $1.5 million in cash. We project, with the help of Tom and Tracy, that with regard to that particular amount of cash, that each fund would contribute their portion to. By the way, it wouldn't be just a sort of a general fund impact. That's what we're projecting. We would effectively lose as a fund, throughout the context of this fiscal year. So if indeed council is amenable to that, we would certainly entertain questions, your input, direction otherwise. Tom's got some data if you feel inclined to want to see that as well. But that is a break-even figure to get us through the fiscal year without going further into the red. There's always a possibility that bad health claims and history can drive us further off the path, but there's also the possibility that good health history and claim history and so forth can actually bring some money into the mix, should we be so fortunate. So there's still those variables out there, given that we still have 3/4 of the year to go through.
Questions? Chris and then Dallas.
And that's what we have on the next work session for budget amendments?
Yes,
That
sir.
discussion?
That's correct.
Yeah, so I'm dig into that next work session, get some data and show us some options on that.
You bet.
You have anything, Dallas?
I'm giving approval for it
Oh,
because
okay.
it's needed to be done. I would like to know where the money comes from.
We can talk to that question a little bit, and let me just back up to Councilman Walsh's question or comment too. The amendment will deal with the cash requests that we're requesting, not necessarily the long-term recommendation dealing with the health fund. I just want to be sure I was clear in that regard, because we won't be prepared for a long-term recommendation next week. As to where the money's coming from, Mr. Pitlick, do you mind going through the litany of contributing funds that would help that happen?
Absolutely. We allocated the 1.5 million over the various funds based on the number of participants each fund has. And the majority of it we're proposing to come from Fund 30, which is the capital fund. And that would cover all the general fund and general fund dependent funds. And that would be a little over $1.1 million. And this is excess money that was generated over the years through the general fund. So even though it's in the capital fund, it is general fund dollars.
And not 1%.
Not 1%, correct, it's not 1%. The other allocations, water would be hit for about 81,000, sewer 22,000, wastewater treatment plant 55, refuge 59, Battlefield 55, and the water treatment plant 37, and weed and pest a little over $8,000. So that's where the 1.5 million is proposed to come from to help the health fund.
Any questions for Tom? Just need a thumbs up.
Thank you. And as we just discussed, we will have that as a part of the amendment discussion next week, and potentially then, pursuant to your discussion, move it forward for formal recommendation via resolution in the meeting following, which would be the 20th. Thank you. Pertaining to the next item, if I may, Mr.
Yep, you
Mayor, it's kind of a similar topic, the amendment. We're obviously getting you time to think about some of the more major features of the amendment, as you might guess. We talked a couple weeks ago about the fire department needing some help on the battery side of the equation in their operation, an amendment feature. The police department also has a request, and I should say this type of request is not characteristic of what I would normally do with an amendment request. I usually wait for a budget discussion, the primary budget discussion in the spring, before I try to appeal to the council for added positions. So this approach that I'm taking is not normal for me. It's not something you can expect to see in every amendment that we go through. So please be aware of that. However, the police department has identified a few very critical positions that indeed would help their operation. I would also suggest, and we can go into this in a little more detail next week, Finance has a position that they would like to have you consider as well as a part of the amendment, albeit on a much smaller scale than what we're seeing here this evening. the police department. There are 3 positions that the police department would like to have you consider for adoption via an amendment, this amendment. And they would suggest are very critical positions that they would like to have in order to, A, get more officers back onto the street and help ameliorate some of their shortages in that regard, as well as shore up a couple of functions that are currently understaffed and not operating in the capacity that it should be. Many of you are familiar that with the idea that currently we have an officer supporting the public information functions of the police department. The chief is recommending that that position be civilianized and that indeed the officer be put back into the ranks of the patrol and or detective roles, whatever that might require, that move might require. The effect, however, does create a new position, an increased FTE in the police department by having a civilian PIO work for the department. And so, as I mentioned, what that does is not only help us to sustain a very positive and successful public information effort that the PD has had for years, but it also has the effect of allowing that sworn officer to be back into the ranks, again, to help ameliorate some of our staffing shortages and demand for greater services in the department. Another weakness that the chief would indicate is important to be sustained by a new position, again, an increased FTE, is that of creating a supervisory position in the evidence storage, facilitation function of the department. You are all aware probably that for years we've had a position and a support position in that function. We are now suggesting that role be supported by 3 individuals, one of which should be a supervisor, and get their arms around, if you will, the huge issue of maintenance and oversight with regard to evidence in our department. The third role that the police would advocate for is that of having a customer service position brought into the civilian ranks, if you will, that would free up the folks who are currently assigned to take that role on more of a rotational basis. We have records people serving in that capacity. We have CSOs kind of rotating through and helping in that capacity. The chief would suggest that be supported by a civilian position that would have a full-time responsibility to see to the customer service needs in that department, which are pretty routine and regular. The final thing that I would add to the amendment that the chief and I have talked quite a bit about is that of supporting the body cam project with some additional funds. And if I could defer to the chief to give you a little more detail as to that particular piece of the amendment and project, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council, the body cameras, the council has been very supportive of establishing the new body cameras and the new integrated in-car camera system and the computers that power all of that. We went through a very exhaustive process where we took proposals from a myriad vendors. We narrowed that down to 3 vendors. They came in and we did a very intensive testing process of those 3 products. We've identified one. During that testing process, we had a chance to look at the storage options. And this particular vendor that was by far and away the overwhelming choice of the people that were sampling these different products offered us a hard-to-ignore storage solution for our camera system. So originally we were speccing this out for on-site storage, which would require us to possess and maintain the servers, the ability to recover those. We could only store so much for such amount of time, and then have to download it to other media, and if needed we would have to restore it. all of that was labor intensive. They've come back with us with a very attractive offer for cloud storage on an unlimited basis. And that unlimited basis frees up, it helps with the personnel that are required to retrieve and maintain that data. It's kept on a permanent basis and it's unlimited, so there would be no restrictions on the officers. You know, hey, we can't afford to store that, so don't record this, don't record that. We would be recording everything in 1080p instead of lower quality recordings. And so the enhanced price that I'm suggesting that you consider is to account for that cloud storage on an unlimited basis, which then frees us up to make sure that every possible aspect of our interactions with our citizens is covered by that, as well as our evidence functions and the functions of the police department itself. That enhanced price is roughly speaking $500,000 to get that much better product.
Questions? Chris?
Does that upgrade all of your car cameras too?
Yes, it does.
Bob?
I assume it's not annual.
That is the cost for 5 years of all
Okay.
service and maintenance and all storage, and we've got assurances that at the end of 5 years that now there's a new non-introductory price of storage. So we think we've negotiated it, and we have gone back and forth with the proffered vendor and significantly reduced the cost. They have finally cried uncle and said, "That's it. We're not giving any more discounts." We think this is a good product for the right price.
Thank you. Charlie?
Thank you, Your Honor. Chief, I hope I'm remembering this right, but I believe in the last legislative session, some privacy protections were put in place. Are you comfortable with how those were worded, and when we work within those effectively?
Wyoming is very favorable. The laws that we have are very favorable to using these for the intended purpose. I am very comfortable.
Any other questions? Kenny?
The new positions, does that fit within the study that we had done? Is that part of their recommendations?
That's an excellent question. As you can remember from the CPSM study, we're now 11 months into working. Some of the positions that were already considered for FY19 were to address that. What we're finding out is the problems identified in our evidence holding and storage and destruction is so problematic. We're assigning other people to do that duty, and we're still barely making a dent in it. That is why I'm proposing the new FTE for that evidence custodian supervisor position to help manage and deal with this on a more direct basis. The customer service representative is also mentioned in the CPSM study, and the PIO position is, in my opinion, kind of a no-brainer. We have a veteran employee, a 20-year employee, serving in that position. I can pay a civilian much less, can take that sworn officer position, get them back out onto the streets where we need that help the most, and yet we have been contacted by surprisingly high number of high-caliber candidates for such a position. That we don't have to pay nearly as much to get somebody that's more finely attuned to the community and our marketing and branding of the department and our city.
Do we currently have rolling stock for these folks to roll back to the street, if you will?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Mr. Mayor, can I add something? With regard to funding, if I could direct your attention to the chart on the wall there, the sales tax chart. The majority of what we're talking about would be supported by the space on the chart that is green above the flat and curved lines. So that, in my opinion, is above budget receipts, and we do think that would be sufficient to handle the amendment requests that we're asking for. Certainly there is the risk that, and we'll go into this in more detail next week, but certainly there is the risk that funds above budget will not continue throughout the rest of the year, which is typically why I'm not comfortable asking for these kinds of operational enhancements at the amendment time versus a full calendar year or fiscal year period of time. However, indications are strong in the economy locally, and that things are coming pretty positively. So I feel relatively comfortable that these kinds of things, even if we only hit budget from now on, can be supported. The project, however, will be supported with excess 1 cent 15 funds over and above the funds you have already allocated out of 1 cent 15 for the body cam project.
Dallas.
This is my opportunity. Are you recommending this?
Yes, sir.
It seems to me if we took a 1% tariff that we charge on the power bill that everybody pays for, it's around $400,000 to $500,000 a year. What I've been saying for almost 2 years is I would like to see a funding that gets pipelined into the police department that they can use for things like this. That's just going to come in there in a pipeline. And where that is now is it goes to CADA. And I know that in some article, if they quoted you right, when you mentioned, Mr. Manager, that you defunded a couple of nonprofits who took the money and then parceled it out. We're doing the same thing with CADA. We have no say-so over how they spend the money. We have no oversight, really. But this police department needs a funding source. And so I have 55 days left. It's not going to happen in 55 days. But I'm just saying that so maybe somebody can remember it, and someday they might think it actually is a pretty good idea. Because then the chief has that funding source, and that can take care of these positions, it can take care of the body cam, it can take care of a lot of things. And I would think he's going to use it for the betterment of the city. We can see it. I can't see it with CADA. I just don't see what's happened, what they've done in the 2 years I've almost been here. I have seen what the chief's done, what the police department's done, and I want to support that police department 100% for the next 55 days at least.
So do you need a thumbs up from us for this amendment? Or are we doing that? How are we doing that?
If I get a thumbs up so we can have that direction to prepare the amendment accordingly, that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Special meeting, I was going to see if Chris was okay with it, but I'm sure he was. Request for the Wyoming Business Council grant.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Laird, thank you so much for that segue. I really appreciate it, because what we're talking about here is a request from your favorite agency, CADA, as it relates to a grant that they would like to pursue for from the Business Council. Many of you are aware of the designation that much of Casper received as it relates to opportunity zones. The opportunity zone designation is providing a gateway, if you will, with regard to a number of funding opportunities for to incentivize development, if you will, in these areas of our community and in the larger community of our county. There are a number of funding opportunities that we as a larger community have not taken advantage of over the years that we hope to correct. The grant that we're pursuing, and I should say the Economic Development Joint Powers Board is pursuing, would ask the Business Council to hire a consultant that would lay out a plan for our larger community that would instruct us how to take advantage of these opportunity zones more appropriately and proactively, as well as other funds and other funding sources that are out there for development that, again, up until now, we have not appropriately or proactively taken advantage of. The request for this is really for the purpose of gaining a resolution from this group in that as a joint powers board, they need the support of their member bodies in order to move forward. They are not requesting funding from the city of Casper, rather just a resolution of support that makes their application to the business council possible. It does sound like they're asking the same thing from the county, and hopefully would move forward then accordingly. So by doing that, however, we will need to have a special meeting next week in order to put that resolution into motion. And so accordingly, we're asking for your permission in that regard.
Questions, anything about it?
Why do we have to have a special meeting next week?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman.
Because it's a vote, it's an action, so we would just do it on Tuesday and have
Right.
it.
Right.
That's exactly right. Consistent with the time frame that you set aside for your work session, basically. Yeah.
Just so I'm clear, so they're asking from the Wyoming Business Council funding just for that position to help them with opportunity zones, is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the program that they're trying to get funds through is their planning grant program through the Wyoming Business Council.
Gotcha.
And so I can't remember exactly the amount of money that they're seeking from. I think it was 30? 25 that they're seeking from the Business Council. 25,000 for the Business Council to hire a consultant that would put this strategy plan together.
Okay, thanks.
You bet.
I'm gonna miss my first meeting next Tuesday. I won't be here.
In 2 years?
Almost. I won't be here. I've been telling you that.
Yeah, I know. Is everybody okay with that?
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I know we've got we don't have any time, so we won't go over the agenda. We do have an executive session right after. I will just say quickly, I know I would like to get home as well to watch the returns.
I
know
gotta
there's
go
a couple
vote.
of people, and she has to vote.
Oh my goodness.
So
Gotta make this quick, less than an hour.
I know you'll make it go
They
quick
close
too,
at
'cause I
7.
might vote for you.
dang it! Oh my God, that's right.
Just one quick item. I attended the state office building progress meeting, which he is on that board.
Good evening. Sorry about that, folks. We're a little behind. I now call the November 6, 2018 regular council meeting to order. Would council members please denote your presence by depressing your yes switch? Sorry, I feel like it's been forever here. Council meetings are also televised. Oh, please record the vote.
Well, Councilmember Huber's here, correct?
He is, yes, I'm sorry.
So they're all present, but Councilman Huber's.
Oh my, yes. So we need to wait for that, John?
You can start.
We can, okay, thank you. Council members are also, or council meetings are also televised and can be viewed on cable channel 192. I'm gonna have these two young ladies come over here and help me with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, ladies. Thank you. Chair would entertain a motion to approve by minute action the minutes of the October 16, 2018 regular council meeting as published in the Casper Star Tribune on October 28, 2018.
So moved.
Moved by Councilman Johnson, seconded by Councilman Hopkins. Any amendments? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve by minute action the November 6, 2018 bills and claims as audited by City Manager Napier.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Powell, seconded by Councilman Johnson. Any abstentions? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve by minute action the November 6, 2018 conflict claim as audited by City Manager Napier.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilman Walsh, seconded by Councilman Morgan. Abstentions? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
With Councilmember Powell abstaining, motion passes.
Now we turn to our bright spot. In August, City Parks employee Scott Zimmerman started to feel like something wasn't quite right, and mentioned to his coworker Mike Yarger, and mentioned it to Mike Yarger. Mike was also had also noticed and contacted Supervisor Paul Zwada, explaining that he believed Scott was suffering from a stroke. After calling 911, Paul met Scott on the field and help soon arrived. Scott was suffering from an ischemic stroke and required immediate care. Doctors at the Wyoming Medical Center and Scott credit Mike Yarger with saving Scott's life by recognizing the symptoms of a stroke and getting help. Tonight, we would like to take the time to honor Mike and Paul tonight and thank them for recognizing Scott's symptoms and for taking the appropriate and correct actions and steps to get medical assistance. So if they would come forward, please. We'll get his team. Make sure I get to the right one. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thanks, Paul. Thank you to both. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Now is the time that we invite anyone in the audience who wishes to speak with the council to come forward. As stated on the first page of our agenda, we ask of the following: Please state your name and address. Direct all your questions to me. No personal attacks on our staff or on the council will be tolerated, and council will not respond to personal matters, and those will be referred to our city manager. Questions posed by speakers may or may not be responded to, and presentations must be limited to only 5 minutes and no duplication or extensions. So please come forward. Good evening.
Mayor. Pat Sweeney, 951 North Kimball. I would just, on the consent agenda as to the authorization and submission of the Wyoming Business Council grant for the Midwest Avenue reconstruction, you know, any support that I can offer, I think that's a good move. Whether there'll be money available is a whole nother situation, but hopefully there will be in that budget round something in there, whether there'd be $3 million that the SLIB board could approve out of that. Hard to tell. So, but anyway, I wanted to speak in favor of that this evening. Another question that I hadn't asked previously or thought about, but has there been any discussion if by chance there'll be any excess funds on 15? If that's been looked into. I know with the downturn, I would highly doubt there'll be any excess, because I think we did the council did a better job of budgeting. So the huge excesses that were left from 14, I wouldn't anticipate, but anyway, just a question.
I know we haven't had any in-depth conversation, but I'll kind of let Carter maybe answer that a little bit more in depth.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, Representative Sweeney. Thanks for being here tonight. The question, I believe, is whether or not excess 1 cent 15 funds were considered for part of the reconstruction of Midwest. And I would say that we have not done that at this point in time, given that we have not expected that we would receive excess 1 cent 15. However, if indeed the Business Council grant does not come through, we certainly will be coming back to the council with other funding ideas and or projecting how long, in fact, we may need to displace this project until we have funds adequate to do the full scope that we were hoping to accomplish with this initial application. So we've got a couple things we may need to talk about, and certainly I think if we can get help on the side of the state in terms of getting some support and moving this project through to its success in terms of our request for funding, that would very much be appreciated.
Does that help, Pat?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Anybody else next? First come, first serve. Good evening.
Good evening. My name's Steven Smathers. I live at 3311 Stagecoach Drive. Me and my fiance are here tonight in defense of our dog Simon. I'm sure a lot of people have seen on Facebook and a lot of happenings with that. We're just basically here in opposition. I know Councilmember Chris Walsh is going to propose a new ordinance for animals, and we just want to stand in opposition to that. We think that there's a problem currently at Metro. A lot of the dogs are underfed. So we witnessed on Sunday that there was one dog that was rolling around in its own feces. There was urine on the floor, and we think with the new ordinance getting pushed through that this will only increase the population of dogs and animals up in the shelter, and problems will get worse. And we think that I mean, it can't get any worse than that. There's a one animal control officer, Tiffany Hyde, was, we noticed on Facebook that she was going to propose ideas that we do stand with on her as far as changes in the law. We think the current law is good. It's just handled in a manner that is not supportive of dog owners or animal owners in general, because it's a very vague law. We think we need something done that states more clearly animal owners' rights and rights for animals. I mean, our dog's been locked up there since the night of Friday, November 2nd, and they're charging us $40 a day to keep our dog up there. And there's how many dogs up there that are malnourished, we just don't understand where our money's going to, that we're paying for that, and that in all reality we can't afford. We think it is outrageous to charge that much for something that was completely out of our control. And we just wanted to come and voice our opinion and our opposition to the new ordinance that might be getting proposed, and that's why we're here.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you coming up. Good evening.
Hello. My name is Jamie Bates, and I live on Indian Paintbrush Street, and I'm here to comment on the proposed animal ordinance that is currently open for public comment on the city's website. I do not agree with the addition of defining an animal as being at large when they are on their owner's private property. I ask that council remove this section and respect private property owners' rights by not infringing on their rights in this regard. In the printout from the city's website, this section is found on lines 30 through 36. I do not agree with the addition of defining an animal as being at large if its muzzle can extend outside the enclosed cabin compartment of a vehicle or beyond the side of a bed truck. The current ordinance has a restriction of the same phrasing, but is specific to a parked vehicle. It needs to remain specified to a parked vehicle. If I am driving down the road and my dog is in the car with me and his nose is outside of the car window, he is posing no danger to other cars that are traveling, and anybody who's close enough to my traveling car is in wrong, not my dog. This section is found on lines 39 through 41. Some owners have taken the time to train themselves and their dogs in exceptional ways to respond to voice command and be as much in control of the owner by voice as others do by leash. The definition of control needs to be extended to include animals that respond to instant recall and command. Define instant as in needing to be told one time. There are some dog owners that cannot control their dog when their dog is on a short leash, but they would be in compliance, and that's wrong. Please add voice command to the definition of control. This is found on lines 59 through 61. I do not agree with the presumptive evidence as mentioned on lines 292 through 293. Escape of an animal being presumptive evidence that the fencing requirements are not being met is wrong. It does not take into consideration mitigating factors, like a vindictive neighbor constantly opening the dog gate and letting your dogs out. This one is personal experience. It took us 6 months to figure out how our 2 dogs were getting out of our 6-foot privacy fence. We were constantly doing things to prevent our dogs from getting out, not knowing how they were getting out in the first place. I only figured it out when the neighbor who was letting our dogs out did so when they thought I was not home. I had the window open, and I heard them specifically tell another neighbor this was how they were getting our dogs out, and they walked over to the gate and opened it. At that point, we were able to remedy the problem by padlocking and bolting the gate, posing a fire hazard. But the city was going to fine me if I didn't. I realize that my experience is not a common one, so if you could add in that the repeated escapes could warrant an investigation into proper enclosure, that would at least allow for effort to prevent escapes to play a part. In the section of vicious animals, I would like to see an added statement that more narrowly defines a vicious dog as one who has bitten, attacked, endangered, or inflicted injury on a human being on public or private property that was not deliberately provoked to a response. A dog defending itself should not be deemed vicious just because it bit the kid that had trespassed onto its owner's property and was hitting it with a stick or throwing rocks at it. a dog has a right to defend itself when being provoked. That is addressed on lines 658 through 659. Lines 750 through 752 state that any animal declared dangerous or vicious by any agency or department of this city, another municipality, county, or state shall be subject to the provisions of this ordinance. Only a court should have the right to declare that an animal is dangerous or vicious. This allows for due process and ensures the owner had the opportunity to defend their animal's actions. Allowing any agency to declare an animal dangerous or vicious is wrong. How can an owner properly appeal a decision by some agency over their determination of their pet being deemed dangerous or vicious? It should be left to the courts, and the courts only, to make that determination. The definition of a reckless animal owner, 6.04.305, needs a little work. I would like to see a qualifier of some sort in here about it being the same violation. As it currently reads, a person can buy a dog on Monday.
30 seconds.
Thank you. And it could be deemed reckless if their dog's muzzle breaches the wall of their truck on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday their dog bolts from the house and leaves their property chasing a runner down the street, all while the new owner is trying to figure out their new dog. This may not be the intention of this section of the ordinance, but the scenario I just laid out is exactly what could happen. If the owner is taking appropriate steps to remedy situations and are not repeating the same offense, or is repeating the same offense while trying to take steps to correct it, they should not need to worry about being deemed a reckless owner. Can I read the last two paragraphs?
You bet.
Thank you. Most of the proposed ordinance is decent, and I have no major objection. The parts that I mentioned, however, need to be addressed. I realize we need to protect our citizens, but a good portion of the concerns brought by runners and those out walking could be addressed by better enforcement of our current ordinance. Pet owners who willfully allow their dogs to run around the neighborhood are still going to do so, even with more laws. A new law is not going to make people keep their pets on their property. All it is going to do is add more laws to the books that, if the current trend keeps going, will not be enforced either. Why take away the rights of many because of the abuse of few? The recent discussion regarding dog bites, I would really like to know how many of those dog bites occurred off of the private property owner's property. How many of those dog bites occurred when the dog was under control of the owner by way of leash, and how many of those bites were defensive rather than attack? My daughter was one of those dog bite statistics, and she is at least 50% responsible for that dog bite. None of these new regulations would have prevented the bite, and she should not be counted in the stats that drive this new ordinance. I would like to know the specifics on this high number of dog bites. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you want that? Thank you.
My name is Megan Schaefer, 232 South Lenox, here in Casper, and I'm here to speak about the new proposal of the changes to the leash laws. So I have also some concerns. I want to say first, Councilman Walsh, I really appreciate your looking at this particular issue. I have dogs. I also am the owner of K&M Pet Products. I train dogs. I do not agree with the previous comment of people knowing when their dogs are under control, because I see it all the time. They do not. I walk my dogs at Highland Park because I live close to that area. And I almost always encounter a dog that is off lead. And when I walk my dogs, I have 3. I have a mini pack, and other dogs are not welcome to approach my dog. And I tell people, get your dog. Oh, it's okay, he's friendly. I have given Dallas Laird a recommendation for reading. It's Suzanne Clothier. And her article is called, It's Okay, He's Friendly. I would really recommend everybody read that article, because then you understand just how incredibly offensive it is for one dog to run into the face of another dog. So to say that my dog is under voice command, yeah, my dogs might be, and I can promise you, you would think my dogs are all very well behaved, but it also depends on the situation. And so that has to be considered. So that being said, I think it is also very true and accurate that our current law is not enforced. And until we start enforcing the law that we have, there's not a lot of point to creating more regulations to what we have. We've got to enforce what we have. My husband had, I thought, a great suggestion that we potentially ask meter maids to go to parks. I guarantee you when school starts, there's not a citizen in Casper that doesn't know where the school zones are, and they don't speed through them. Why? Because they know that on any given day, there is a police officer at that school zone enforcing it. The one thing I would say that I like about the leash law, or would like to see expanded, which I think your proposal does, is to extend it beyond just city parks. I can also tell you that my husband, we don't frequently walk our dogs because we so frequently encounter dogs off lead. And my husband started carrying a handgun, a pistol, with birdshot that would not kill an animal, but so that he could defend our dogs and himself against loose dogs. It is a problem in the city, and it does need to be addressed. I'm not certain, so there are some things there. I also had the same questions regarding these statistics. I broke them down into January 1st of 17 through 6/29 of 17, compared to January 1st, 17 to 6/29 of 18. And I found that, in fact, there was no increase in the number of bites. Now, in these statistics, there are also chasing and threatening behavior. I don't know if you've looked at this, but there's 2 horses, there's 2 raccoons, there's at least 1 coyote, and who in this room really doesn't think that they might get bitten very easily if they approach a raccoon or a coyote? I'm thinking I'm going to get bit. I'm not doing that. There's also a mouse and a rat. So there's that. And I did call because I wanted to know as well, what's the location? Is this somebody's home and you've got a herding breed dog, like a border collie or an Australian shepherd, and the kids are running around and the dog is hurting them and nips them? Is that included in these numbers? So there's that. And with that, I'll get on to what I would love to see changed about this. As I said, I'd love to see adding public areas. And I do not personally have a problem with the private property. I think if it's fenced private property, my front yard is not fenced. And if my dogs are out there, I know they're not going to bite somebody, but somebody else doesn't know that and could.
30 seconds.
Okay. So I would like to propose changing section 6.04.10. Recommend striking if the animal within a vehicle can extend its muzzle outside, and etc. Another thing I'd really love to see changed, my oldest son, was killed in Iraq and is buried at Highland Park Cemetery. The current law, as well as the proposed, prevent me from going to my boy's grave with my dogs. And I'll tell you right now, I'm generally a law-abiding citizen, but I break the law every time I go to see my boys. I have 2 sons that are buried there, and I take my dogs. I take them on leash because it's disrespectful for my dogs to be running around. I don't let them run over other people's graves. I don't let them go to the bathroom on headstones or really anywhere in the cemetery. If perchance they did, I would certainly pick up, because I pick up after them everywhere. But I would love to see that stricken as far as not being allowed at the cemetery. I have some other suggestions, and I've printed them out. Another one that's really important, I think, is the rabies certificate, and I would love to see titers be allowed for your animals. For those of you who might have a 10-pound cat or a 10-pound dog, do you know that the rabies vaccination that your dog gets is the exact same as a 150-pound St. Bernard? And titers are used in the healthcare professions, in child care professions, to establish immunity, and you can get a titer for your dog or your cat. I would like to see that allowed. Many people wouldn't do it because it's much more expensive than getting another vaccination, but I think we should have the option not to have to poison our family members. So I have a copy of other changes, and can I submit?
Yeah, if you want to give those to the city manager, it'd be great.
And I have some other documentation that I brought regarding titers and Also, rabies statistics. Since 2009, there has not been one dog that has, and there's like 8 copies in there for everybody. There hasn't been one documented case of a dog with rabies. There have been 3 of cats, and the rest of them are bats. The most common one is a cow. So I would really love for you guys to consider making some changes like that in addition. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Good evening.
Mr. Mayor, Brad Hopkins, I'm Executive Director over at Wyoming Rescue Mission at 230 North Park. We don't rescue animals, we say, but people. Slightly different topic, just wanted to stop by real quick just to thank you for including Wyoming Rescue Mission, the city staff, in the human services funding for orphaned agency funding. I'm not sure exactly what orphan agency is, but it sounds official, so thank you for the vote to come. I was just at our facility over on Park Street, the new Park Street Center, talking to a gentleman, and had to compliment Chief McFeeters. Gentleman said that he was sleeping in his car at the Walmart, and an officer saw him there and helped him get to the mission. So he's got a place at our facility tonight and enjoying a warm meal right now. So thank you. Wanted to just also briefly comment related to the panhandling ordinance under consideration. Not really here to either oppose or endorse, but just to consider the personal need and care and regard for each individual, and that we not punish anybody that's struggling in the community that's looking for assistance. And I compliment you on your work as a council. I know you have to balance personal individual rights with health and safety of the community. I recently was over at Morad Park and was approached by a gentleman who was clearly struggling, living out of his van with another fellow, and they solicited me, of all things, you know, I can't get a 30-minute break over at Morad Park. But anyhow, Lord said, you got work to do, Brad. So this gentleman asked for some help with some gasoline, was able to help him out a little bit myself, but then tell him about the rescue mission and invite him. And lo and behold, that man showed up and found his way into our discipleship recovery program and a new life, and is doing much better for himself. So as a leader of an agency that assists those who are struggling with homelessness and poverty, we certainly encourage compassion, and so many great organizations in town that the community consider giving their charitable contributions to those that are doing good work with those that are struggling. And with that in mind, I did bring some real help cards here for Wyoming Rescue Mission. So this is a great tool, give to each of the council men and women, ladies. But thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate it.
I just had one question.
Oh, hey, Brad. Back quick.
Based upon your experience, do any of these folks that this panhandling ordinance is aimed at, could they afford a fine of anywhere from $0 to $750?
Typically not.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Mileage, how are you?
Good. And, Michael Mileage, North Jefferson Street. I don't know too much about this dog thing. My dog got killed about a month and a half ago, my puppy, And this was a dog that I spent 24 hours a day. We did everything. He got me back in shape when I got when I got my puppy. Lost quite a few pounds. He got killed by a pit bull. We were out walking, and we had been doing this for, 2.5 years. And he wasn't a dog to me. He was my son. I don't agree with dogs that are nice, polite. If people spend time with them, raise them correctly. I don't believe in leashes. Number one, for me, I can't do a leash. I physically cannot. I've only got one leg. Basically one hand. I got a lot of different. I got epilepsy. I got POCD. It goes on and on and on and on. But my dog was taught that he don't go past the interstate. He don't go. When I get to that crosswalk, he's there. He asks, and he doesn't move until I say, okay. My dog was trained for this. Dogs, I like animals better than I do people, actually. And I wouldn't put the mare on the leash.
Some people would actually want to do that to me, actually.
Well, maybe the mare. But I don't know. I haven't been trying to keep up with because of the situation that I've been going through. So I don't know exactly what the laws are.
30 seconds,
perfect.
Mike.
Okay, the laws are just perfect the way they are for myself, and that means it's okay to keep my dog off of a leash because that dog is completely controlled at all times. He was trained that way. He's every time we walk outside, he's still trained again, over and over and over. I just don't believe that it has anything to do with the problems that you guys are having. There's all around the north side of town, we have dogs running around that are not.
I gave you extra 30 seconds mileage.
That we need to do something about that, because these dogs are, some of them are out of control. So
Thanks for coming up, Mike. Appreciate it, ma'am.
Mr. Mayor, I had one question.
Oh, yeah. Hold on, mileage.
Hey, mileage. Let me ask you a question. 'Cause I feel the same way you do about my little dog. If somebody would have had a leash on that bulldog, would that bulldog have hurt your dog?
No, it wasn't. It was a pit bull.
Or a pit bull?
It.
They'd leashed him. If the people had leashed him, he wouldn't have got your dog?
He wasn't. He wasn't being taken care of. He was just loose.
But if he would have been under control and on a leash, your dog would be here tonight.
If what now?
If that pit bull would have been on a leash, he wouldn't have hurt your dog. Your dog would have been here tonight.
No, what I'm trying to tell you, Dallas, is he was free. He wasn't in a yard, or he wasn't.
Right.
My dog doesn't go roaming. He's
I
with
understand.
me.
I think I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else? Okay. Moving on. Please read the consent agenda title.
Established November 20th, 2018 as the public hearing date for consideration of an ordinance to vacate portions of South Oak Street, South Elm Street, West 8th Street, West 9th Street, West 10th Street, two alleys located in Block 84, Casper Edition, an alley located in Block 92, Casper Edition, and a portion of an alley located in Block 93 of the Casper Edition.
Chair to entertain a motion to, by minute action, establish the public hearing date just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, seconded by Vice Mayor Powell. Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
I now declare the public hearing open for the consideration of the annexation, plat and replat and zoning, creating the State Office Building addition. Mr. City Attorney, do you have any exhibits?
Your Honor, we have two exhibits. Exhibit number 1, correspondence from Liz Becker to J. Carter Napier, dated October 3, 2018. And exhibit number 2, affidavit of publication, is published in the Casper Star Tribune, dated October 30, 2018.
Mr. City Manager, do you have a report?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I do. As your video exhibit would demonstrate, the property in question is the area north of the Natrona County High School and Collins Drive. This is a project that has been discussed for quite some time. What was surprising to me was to find that a number of these properties in the subject area have not been platted nor ever annexed. And so the ordinance and process that we're proposing this evening, that would start this evening, would actually correct all that and more appropriately plat the property and create the parcel necessary for the envelope that the new state building would reside within. And so with your favorable approval for this reading and the following two, that will happen, and the state will be better prepared to move forward into the construction phase of this project.
Thank you. Council will now listen to public comment. Public hearing comments are limited to 5 minutes, and no duplication of speakers will be allowed. At this time, I would ask those individuals who wish to speak in favor of the issues involving the State Office Building addition to please approach the lectern. Those who wish to speak in favor. Good evening.
Good evening, Kevin Hawley, 2302 West 39th. I'm here both as a private citizen, but in all honesty, I'm also a member of the Joint Task Force as a representative for the community and downtown to be a good neighbor with the state as they do this substantial consolidated construction project. This has gone through planning and zoning without any recommended changes. I believe planning and zoning and staff have done their due diligence and everything's up to snuff. I would also ask you to consider that this doesn't have any impact truly on neighbors. This is, what is it, almost 12 acres of contiguous property. It's not with a private entity that could flip it tomorrow and become a super mall. It is the state that's not going anywhere for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, as long as something cataclysmic doesn't happen with Yellowstone, I think. So I am here to speak in favor of this, I don't know, is it called an ordinance or replat and annexation? I think it's good for everyone involved, the city, the community, and the state. I ask you to consider this favorably. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Any others who wish to speak in favor? Good evening.
Jim Chappett, 7950 Hat 6 Road. I work for the State of Wyoming Construction Department, Construction Management Division. Just to add to that, the state has been challenged in the last, it's actually 6 years ago when the old Midwest building where Workforce Services now resides, we were faced with a dilemma of putting a lot of money into that building, upwards to $15 million in a renovation, bring that building up to code. At that time, our department decided that wasn't worth it. We needed to look at something different. At the same time, the David Street property that was part of the Yellowstone district was put together a trade with the city to trade some property, give them that building so they could move forward with the David Street station. During our planning process, we soon discovered it was a pretty good idea to move all state agencies into a one-stop shop to help the community, the people that use it. A lot of those folks use more than one department. It's good access, it's downtown, it's close to other things that they need, so it has turned out to be a win-win for both the state and the community. So with that, I request a favorable vote on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Oh, hold on one second, Jim. Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
Am I remembering correctly that the state has crunched the numbers to see how long the investment in this new building, how long it would take for that to be paid back by no longer having rent receipts and no longer having to maintain the existing deteriorating buildings? And was that like 12 years that I heard? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any others who wish to speak in favor? At this time, I'd ask those individuals who wish to speak in opposition to the issues involving the State Office Building addition, please approach the lectern. Those who wish to speak in opposition. Those who wish to speak in opposition.
I'm back. Megan Schaefer, 232 South Lenox, and owner of K&M Pet Products, who is displaced by this particular state building. I'm sorry, but your argument that this is putting everything together as customer service does not hold water, as the DFS and unemployment office were already housed in the same office. That's the one most commonly that people would go to multiple offices. I don't know about the rest of you, but most things I do, I get on the internet or I call people. I do not go to the office. And to say that it's a good location for downtown and it will help downtown, no, I'm sorry. College Street is not downtown. It's across from the NCHS football stadium. I anticipate seeing that you're going to see some traffic problems from this building and the implementation. And to say that you're making it better for downtown when you are actually leaving the building on the corner of Midwest and Center, which is downtown, vacant, is not an argument that holds water. I realize that this ship has sailed, it's water under the bridge, but I just wanted to say that, you know, you're not being honest if that's what you're saying you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Any other that want to speak in opposition? Okay, there being no one else to speak for or against the issues involving the state office building addition, I now declare the public hearing closed. Please read the ordinance by title only.
An ordinance approving the annexation, plat, replat, and zoning, creating the state office building addition, and also approving the state office building addition subdivision agreement.
Chair to entertain a motion to approve on first reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Moved by Vice Mayor Powell, seconded by Councilman Walsh. Discussion. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Your Honor. This is a project that's been in the works for a number of years, and as Mr. Shapp, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Chappett, excuse me, did verify, in 12 years, the state will be made whole, and from that point forward, saving money, actually, in terms of its operating costs in our community. And I do believe it will be a stimulus to the downtown with having, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 individuals working downtown, which is something that will help us with our development. It wasn't easy to get this done, and there are a number of individuals that worked very hard on this, and I would like to publicly recognize our delegation, including Representative Sweeney and Senator Anderson, Senator Perkins, and our entire delegation, but most importantly, Representative Steve Harshman, who marshaled this legislation through and found creative ways to fund this construction project in an environment that was not, where it was not easy to find those monies and to move this forward. And so I think this is, I think we are probably all underestimating the impact, the positive impact that this facility is going to have on our community. And I just wanted to publicly recognize folks who worked on making it happen. Thank you.
Any amendments? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
I now declare the public hearing open for the consideration of the panhandling ordinance. Mr. City Attorney, do you have any exhibits?
Your Honor, we have one exhibit. Exhibit number 1, correspondence from John Henley to J. Carter Napier, dated October 22, 2018.
Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. The primary thrust of this ordinance and the amendments that are being proposed this evening is to create an ordinance that is more consistent with directive from Supreme Court law, or case law, if you will, and other laws of the land as it relates to panhandling within our community. The city attorney certainly has much more knowledge to impart with regard to the nuances that these changes provide. And if it pleases the council, I'd be happy to defer to his direction for you this evening, if that would help the conversation.
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, council. The ordinance basically starts out by acknowledging the right of people to panhandle, and in fact explains that you know, the various methods of panhandling are legal and we have to be respectful of those personal rights. And then goes on to state, though, that this can't happen everywhere, that you can't do it in every which way. Basically, any type of aggressive type of panhandling or begging or soliciting or trying to impose your views upon someone else are prohibited by this ordinance. And that would mean you can't touch people, you can't threaten people, you can't block their way, you can't follow them around, you can't try to terrorize their children, that type of thing. And so any type of an aggressive type of act is prohibited. The other type of actions which are prohibited under this would be people that approach individuals in areas of financial necessity, where people are going to get money from a ATM machine, or transportation necessity, going to a parking garage, and we've limited that, though, to at night, or to a public bus stop. So people have to go there, and they don't want to be, we don't want to have those people intimidated by people who are hanging around, begging them, working them to try to get money, because those people have to be there, and we should permit them to have freedom of movement, because freedom of movement is part of our constitutional guarantees as well. So we're trying to reach a balance between people who are there, need to solicit, feel like they want to proselytize or whatever else, but at the same time, let people have freedom of movement, freedom of their own to get around and enjoy the city of Casper. And then the final area I'd like to talk about is that it's basically high volume and high speed traffic areas. It just seems to me that that's an area, and it seems to a lot of people around the country, that that's a lot of concern. And if you travel and go into different communities, bigger communities particularly, this seems to be a tact that panhandlers and solicitors are using more and more. And they're out right in the middle of traffic, back and forth, and traffic's coming and going, and it's going fast, and there's volumes of it, and it's slowing down traffic if they do get stopped. And so in that regard, we've also prohibited that with respect to certain designated streets, highways, interstates within the city. So we'd like to think that this is a good balance, that probably if you were to actually look at the volume of the city that would be affected, where people could not panhandle or solicit or proselytize, it would be, maybe 1%, maybe less, maybe a little bit more, but something very, very minute. So you have plenty of opportunities to go out and exercise your right of free speech, which is basically what this is a right. The Supreme Courts and the circuit courts have looked at this. They've viewed this as a right of freedom of speech. And so in that regard, we know we have to make a balancing. We think that we have looked at it hard, and we hope that you will agree. And if not, you certainly have the right to amend that the balance needs to be modified in some way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Council will now listen to public comment. Public hearing comments are limited to 5 minutes and no duplication of speakers. At this time, I ask those individuals who wish to speak in favor of the issues involving the panhandling ordinance, please approach the lectern. Those who wish to speak in favor.
Hello.
Good evening.
My name is Francesco. I live on Trappers Trail. I'd like to give you a few examples as to why I'm in favor of this. First of all, a couple years ago, I was outside a pizza place here, and a guy that kind of reminded me of a friend of mine approached me and asked me for some change. So of course, I felt compassion, I gave him some change, but I jokingly said, "You're not going to go into that liquor store, are you?" He said, no, I'm not going to go in there. I literally just watched him go into the liquor store and buy liquor with it. Today, I was at the library, going to cast my vote, and I literally saw an old lady, walking on the footpath that is behind the library, and I saw her get approached by somebody. He looked like he was homeless, and he was hassling her for money. She said no, proceeded to speed up, and he literally stalked her down the path. And that's why, because I read the Tribune every day, I heard about this, and I feel compelled to share that story with you. Then, of course, there's the famous Cheyenne case for the panhandler that was arrested for public intox, public urination, an open container, and he had a sign that said, "Broke, need help, God bless." But then the officers reported finding $234 in cash on him that he apparently made within a few hours. Tax-free money, nonetheless. The Department of Housing and Urban Development found that 6 out of 10 homeless respondents admitted to problems with alcohol or drugs. That's admitted. So that's, in my opinion, it's probably more like 7 or 8 out of 10. Panhandlers here in the city, they scare away customers from local businesses. They make them feel uncomfortable, and they often avoid certain areas altogether. Alternatively, Casper Housing's and employment programs, they're already in place to circumvent this and to curtail panhandlers, to bring those out in need of poverty, such as the gentleman that came here earlier for the rescue mission. So I just want you to know, these are calculated individuals. They're not stupid. They know what they're doing. They're very good at it. They're transients making a conscious decision to hustle the most compassionate members of our community to feed usually their drug and alcohol habits. Our officers, they need to have something black and white. They need some solid parameters to work off of so that they're not stuck between a rock and a hard spot when they get on these types of calls. And in this way, they'll be able to take appropriate action. So in conclusion, I support the proposed ordinance And furthermore, I suggest, because of what I saw today, that you guys consider expanding the ordinance to include the meandering pedestrian pathways found throughout the city, like the footpaths, because a lot of these members of the public who use it for exercise and recreation, especially the elderly, oftentimes being hidden from direct line of sight from the road. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Thank you. Any others who wish to speak in favor?
Ken Bates, Indian Paintbrush. My wife was here 3 weeks ago talking about it, and she and I both reread the ordinance and saw the updates, and we want to say we're in favor of it. We were impressed that you guys took the consideration, and want to thank those who chose to add some of the stuff that she mentioned. She's a better speaker than I am, but I want to thank you guys, and we are in favor of it, so thank you.
Thank you. Any others who wish to speak in favor? At this time, I'd ask those individuals who wish to speak in opposition to the issues involving the panhandling ordinance to please come forward. Those who wish to speak in opposition. There being no others to speak for or against the issues involving the panhandling ordinance, I now declare the public hearing closed. Please read the ordinance by title only.
An ordinance repealing and replacing Chapter 9.18 of the Casper Municipal Code pertaining to panhandling.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve on first reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Walsh, seconded by Councilman Johnson. Discussion. Councilman Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the work that our city attorney, John Henley, did on this and making it more defined and updating our panhandling ordinance. I would like to point out, there was, I think, a fundraiser last week that there was a few cadets downtown asking for money, asking for a fundraiser, a 16-year-old, 20-year-old, and I can't remember how old the other kid was. But that's a perfect example of panhandling, where you have three people, they're in uniform, but they're asking for money, and they're blocking an entire sidewalk. Another example would be even our fire department when they're doing the boot drive, raising money for a nonprofit organization or even their own department. So I hope when we are enforcing the law, we're doing so in a fair and just manner, and we're not just targeting vulnerable citizens within our community, like what would have happened with the international code that was proposed earlier in the year. So I just hope that it's done fairly and we're not discriminating against certain individuals.
Councilman Laird.
I know there are people who abuse their homelessness and their poverty, and it's a hard thing to confront by anybody. There are a lot of people that ask for money because they need it and they're mentally ill. And if they get a little bit of money, they can eat or have something hot to drink. So I don't, I know everybody has a different story, and I honestly don't see a problem in Casper that's so overwhelming that this panhandling issue can't be handled by other laws, because panhandling, just the name of it, is going to draw attention to the ACLU. And Mr. Henley and I disagree on the validity of this ordinance. I actually think it's unconstitutional. And if the city gets sued on it, is that another thing that we want to have happen? Because it's going to cost us several $100,000 to defend it if we decide to say that we want to defend it, as opposed to carry it on. But we have laws against breach of the peace for somebody who yells and somebody who creates trouble. We have assault and battery laws that can be used if that kind of conduct occurs. We have laws that regulate
pedestrian traffic and people walking out on our highways and streets. That's all illegal. And so when you throw a panhandling ordinance in there, basically it's directed at people who are poor people who are asking for money. There is no one of them who can pay the fine that's suggested. We already have had problems with this alcohol ordinance that we have where some guy got up to $52,000 in fines that he couldn't pay. This is what's going to happen here. They're going to be inhabiting the jail. And then the jail has to decide that for the people who panhandle to get money for booze, how long do we keep them in, and do we want to spend $2,000 or $3,000 when they go into the DTs because we've kept them in jail too long and send them up there? I think that it's a very, I don't know what's driving this council to agree on these huge penalties. 6 months in jail and $750 fine for people that will never read the ordinance, will never know what the legality is in the city, will never understand it. And it's a tool that we don't need personally, and I think it is unconstitutional, and it's going to continue to be dumped by the federal courts. I sent you all a link on that of the recent cases where this has happened. Mr. Henley has done a good job in trying to craft his way around it, but lawyers can see through certain kinds of legal facades. And one of the facades is, well, you can't have free speech if it's within 20 feet of a ATM machine. I mean, you can have free speech applies everywhere in the United States. So it is a problem. Homelessness and poverty is a huge problem, and it's continued and it's grown, and people try to enact laws to punish these people, and it doesn't work, and this one isn't going to work either. And I'm going to vote against it, just simply because I think we already have the laws that the chief needs to enforce whatever problems may occur by someone who not only asks for money, but then does something compounding that problem. Because the asking for money is freedom of speech and is not illegal. But it's tied into this ordinance, and that's why I think this ordinance, someday after my 55 days go by, I hope the city doesn't have an expensive defense of another lawsuit that they could have avoided in the inception.
Vice Mayor.
Question for Mr. Henley. We have a current ordinance in place on panhandling. Is it correct that an officer could cite someone for simply initiating a conversation and asking for money under our current ordinance?
Under our current ordinance, it's much broader as far as the distances from buildings, the distances from entryways. And so in that regard, we were concerned that someone in just a basic part of town could be exercising the right of freedom of speech and potentially be cited. So in order to make the tools available to the officers constitutional and something that they could actually use, we wanted to modify the ordinance and make these changes.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think homeless people are going to carry around a measuring tape and measure off 21 feet.
That's one of the reasons we made the changes, so we don't have to do that so much.
Thank you.
In the discussion. Any amendments? Okay. Oh, yes.
Do you mind if I ask a question in the vein of a potential amendment?
Sure.
If I hear the discussion correctly, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Attorney, it sounds like the current ordinance is inappropriate should it be applied by our law enforcement officials. And so if I'm reading that correctly, then a vote against the changes that we're proposing this evening would actually support an ordinance that we don't view as appropriate in its current form. And so if I do misunderstand that, I would sure appreciate that direction from the attorney.
No, I think you're right, that if this does not get passed, then we have our old ordinance, and then what we'd have to do then, and I would suggest it, is simply to repeal that too, because we don't want to send our police officers out on the streets with a tool that's defective in their back pocket.
So if our panhandling ordinance now fails, then we'll have to go back and repeal the existing ordinance, is what you're suggesting.
I would suggest that, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
Councilmember Laird voting nay, motion passes.
I now declare the public hearing open for the consideration of the motor vehicle operator's license ordinance. Mr. City Attorney, do you have any exhibits?
Mr. Mayor, we have one exhibit. Exhibit number 1, correspondence from John Henley to J. Carter Napier, dated October 22, 2018.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, members of the council. We have a similar theme with regard to this particular change that we're proposing for your consideration. The view that we have regarding our current ordinance on this matter is not appropriate any further, and so we're asking for your support of these changes that would make our ordinance consistent with the mandates of Wyoming state statute and bring those things consistent together in the direction of the current law of the land here in Wyoming.
Thank you. Council will now listen to public comment. Public hearing comments are limited to 5 minutes and no duplication of speakers. At this time, I'd ask those individuals who wish to speak in favor of the issues involving the motor vehicle operator's license ordinance, please approach the lectern. Those who wish to speak in favor. At this time, I'd ask those individuals who wish to speak in opposition to the issues involving the motor vehicle operator's license ordinance to please approach the lectern. Those who wish to speak in opposition. There being no one to speak for or against the issues involving the motor vehicle operator's license ordinance, I now declare the public hearing closed. Please read the ordinance by title only.
An ordinance repealing and replacing Section 10.12.010 of the Casper Municipal Code pertaining to possession of motor vehicle operators licensing or license required.
Chair to entertain a motion to approve on first reading the ordinance just read.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, seconded by Councilman Humphrey. Discussion. Amendments? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
Council will now discuss the ordinance for the hours of sale of alcoholic beverages. This item will be open for public comment and for discussion by council. Please read the ordinance on third reading by title only.
An ordinance amending Section 5.08.320, hours of sale of alcoholic beverages of the Casper Municipal Code.
Chair to entertain a motion to approve on third reading the ordinance just read.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Vice Mayor Powell, seconded by Councilman Johnson. Council will now listen to public comment. Public comments are limited to 5 minutes and no duplications will be allowed. Discussion. Amendments? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
Councilmember Walsh voting nay, motion passes.
Council will now discuss the ordinance for the telecommunications franchise for the Quest Corporation doing business as CenturyLink QC. This item will be open for public comment and discussion by council. Please read the ordinance on second reading by title only.
An ordinance granting a franchise to Quest Corporation doing business as CenturyLink QC to operate and maintain a telecommunications system in the city of Casper, Wyoming.
Chair to entertain a motion to approve on second reading the ordinance just read.
So moved.
Moved by Councilman Johnson, seconded by Councilman Humphrey. Council will now listen to public comment. Public comments are limited to 5 minutes and no duplication of speakers are allowed. Discussion. Any amendments? Please cast your vote. You thinking, Councilman Morgan? Oh.
I might have to tilt the TV our way over here.
Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
Council will now discuss the resolution for the Fire EMS Station Number 5 project. Because this is not on the consent agenda, it will be open for discussion by council. Please read the resolution by title only.
A resolution authorizing change order number 4 to the agreement with Casper Building Systems, Inc. for the Casper Fire EMS Station Number 5 project.
Chair to entertain a motion to approve the resolution just read.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilman Morgan, seconded by Councilman Walsh. Mr. City Manager, report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Many of you are probably recognizing that the Station 5 project is coming into form quite readily. And in so doing, the fire department members therein recognize that the turning radius with regard to getting equipment in and out of the building looked a little tight. Upon testing out those theories, they determined that indeed equipment can get in and get out, albeit with some difficulty and potential risk with regard to property and equipment. In that regard, the suggestion is that 10 feet of concrete pad be added to those turn radiuses in order to make it a little more comfortable for that equipment to be manipulated in and out of the building. And accordingly, a change order in the amount of $29,500 is being proposed in order to bring in the appropriate flat work and other changes needed for the project to accommodate those concerns.
Thank you. Chair would entertain a motion to approve the resolutions just read.
Do we have a discussion?
Oh, my apologies. It's just to the report. I'm sorry. My brain was over here. Discussion. Councilman Laird.
I, of course, asked those be put on consent because you all know how I feel about change orders. The contractor wanting this change order, I think, is a great contractor. I'm going to actually vote for the change order, but I want to explain something about change orders. The way you've explained this, Mr. Manager, is that apparently the plans were drawn differently and they needed to expand the size of the ingress and egress. Is that the way I understand it?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, the construction of the area of the project that we're talking about, it was built to scope and built to spec. Upon having it on the ground, so to speak, it became apparent that that scope was not appropriate with regard to the need of the equipment being engaged in that property and building.
So why didn't the architect catch this to begin with?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, as I explained, well, as I explained earlier, the manipulation of the equipment can take place on the property, and it can do what needs to be done. The concern is not necessarily with regard to what can be done, but what would probably be more appropriate in terms of what typically is done in terms of driving equipment in and out and being able to be a little less concerned about the number of manipulations necessary to get the equipment in and out of the building. That's really all we're talking about.
And I don't see this as the fault of the contractor. I see this possibly the fault of the architect. And then I asked myself, what would Mike Huber's dad have done if an engineer would have looked at this to begin with? I'd also like to have a report, if it can be done, on how much have we spent on change orders just this year. I'd like to know that number, because it seems to me a lot of contractors who I see and talk to, they say, boy, you guys have, you grant all these change orders, and shouldn't some of these things be taken care of at the beginning? And there should be a contract that they have to follow, in this case, the plans. So this is one I'm pretty okay with, actually. But I think the city needs to tighten up its overall approach to change orders, because I'm going to guess you're going to come up with a number that will astound some councilmen. And I'm just thinking it's a protection of the city taxpayers' money. Thank you.
Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That would be interesting to look at the number that we might spend or not spend on change orders. But the fact is, just because you have something that's titled a change order does not mean it's not generally an improvement in the project. So to say that we spent money for change orders, that's not quite telling the whole story. I think you have to understand what a change order is. This made a better driveway, is what it boils down to. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Amendments. Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
Council will now discuss the resolution for the Fairdale Avenue Improvements Project. Because this is not on the consent agenda, it will be open for discussion by council. Please read the resolution by title only.
A resolution authorizing change order number 2 with Wayne Coleman Construction, Inc. for a contract increase and a time extension as part of the Fairdale Avenue Improvements Project.
Chair would entertain a motion to approve the resolution just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Johnson, seconded by Councilman Walsh. Mr. City Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it's my opportunity to talk about another change order. In this particular circumstance, the amount of water in the project, if you will, was more than expected, and the conditions with respect to saturated, subgrade, and so on were such that the current scope was not adequate to appropriately deal with the issues with regard to that level of saturation. Accordingly, the change order asks that $41,500 be considered to extend the initial scope to deal with underdrain, sub-excavation, and so on, necessary to deal with the presence of water and so on in regard to the subject area.
Thank you. Discussion. Amendments. Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
Pardon me. With Councilmember Laird voting nay, motion passes.
So before I begin and read the consent resolutions, you'll notice actually Mr. Hopkins, who was up here earlier, had mentioned the title of orphaned agencies funding. Just really briefly, what that understanding of what that terminology is for it is that these agencies had prior been funded by CAP, and so what we've done is we've taken that funding and we're funding that through the city of Casper. Kind of utilizing, just bringing it all central through here to be able to do that. And so these services are being funded through us. I think that's about as... poverty resistance as well. Yep. Thank you.
So they're not orphans anymore?
They're no longer orphans, Councilman.
Good deal, because they deserve the money.
Amen. Chair would entertain a motion to adopt the consent resolutions just read. Oh, excuse me, I apologize. I am off tonight. Yeah. Good Lord, somebody needs to put me on a leash. Get me out of here. Please read the consent resolutions by title only.
Item 11C1, a resolution stating that the City of Casper, Wyoming condemns bullying and harassment. Item 11C2, a resolution authorizing submission of an application to the Wyoming Business Council under the Business Ready Community Grant and Loan Program for a downtown development project on behalf of the governing body of the City of Casper for the reconstruction of Midwest Avenue between Elm Street and Walnut Street. Item 11C3, a resolution authorizing the mayor to execute the certified local government grant application fiscal year 19 for funding improvements to the accessibility of historic preservation data and information for the citizens of Casper. Item 11C4, a resolution authorizing consent to the sublease of the license agreement between the City of Casper and All Telecommunications LLC. Item 11C5, a resolution approving and accepting a utility easement from Natrona County School District Number 1 for the maintenance of underground utilities within the Natrona County High School campus. Item 11C6, a resolution authorizing Amendment 1 to the cooperative agreement between the Wyoming Department of Transportation and the City of Casper for construction services related to the Interstate 25 and Shoshone Interchange Landscaping Project. Item 11C7, a resolution authorizing Amendment Number 2 to the contract for professional services with Stevens Engineering, Inc. for the Casper Ice Arena Ice Chiller System Replacement Project. Item 11C8, a resolution authorizing a contract for outside city sewer service with Geo Group, Inc. Item 11C9, a resolution authorizing an agreement with Andreen Hunt Construction, Inc. for the Lower Eastell Creek Channel Improvements Phase 2 project. Item 11C10, a resolution authorizing a memorandum of understanding with Natrona County regarding the distribution of Bureau of Justice Assistance Grant Funds. Item 11C11, a resolution authorizing the acceptance of grant funds from the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security for the State Homeland Security Project. And the remainder of the consent titles are for resolutions authorizing agency funding for entities providing human services. I will now list each entity. Item 11C12, the Children's Advocacy Project, Inc. Item 11C13, Wyoming Senior Citizens, Inc. 11C14, Self Health Center, Inc. 11C15, the Wyoming Rescue Mission. Item 11C16, Central Wyoming Hospice and Transitions. Item 11C17, the Brain Injury Alliance. 11C18, Community Action Partnership. 11C19, Central Wyoming Senior Services, Inc. Item 11C20, Natrona County Meals on Wheels. Item 11C21, Youth Crisis Center, Inc. Item 11C22, Mercer Family Resource Center. Item 11C23, CASA of Natrona County. Item 11C23, Mother Seton Housing, Inc. Item 11C24, Interfaith of Natrona County, and 11, am I off? Casper Area Transportation Coalition.
Chair to entertain a motion to adopt the consent resolutions just read.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councilman Laird, seconded by Councilman Walsh. Any abstentions or nay votes? Please cast your vote.
And congratulations for getting through that.
Yeah, that was great. Please record the vote.
With all members voting aye, motion passes.
Please read the consent minute action titles.
Item 12A1, authorizing the purchase of 2 new 3/4-ton 4x4 cab and chassis from Griner Ford for use by the Metro Animal Control Division of the Casper Police Department. And item 12A2, appointing Ruth Heald, Emil Garricky, Christy Axmimit, Kathleen Stepp, Jared Farringer, and reappointing Robin Bromley to the Citizens Transportation Advisory Commission with terms expiring December 31st, 2021.
Chair to entertain a motion to approve the consent minute action agenda items just read.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Hopkins, seconded by Councilman Johnson. Any abstentions or nay votes? Please cast your vote. Please record the vote.
All members voting aye, motion passes.
At this time, we ask council members to bring forward any relevant concerns or items of interest. Councilman Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We had a citizen come forward and speak about parking issues in the high school, in particular over on by Kelly Walsh. The Vice Mayor and myself and the city staff met with the school district, and we'll be bringing forward a proposal that I think will address all the issues better than kind of our old-fashioned critical parking area at NC. Hopefully we'll be seeing that sometime soon, and we can add parking to the process. But I think it'll make it better for the, and it's not just exclusive to Kelly Walsh. Anywhere that might be applicable and there's a problem, we can apply the same process to it. The animal ordinance process, we're getting a lot of feedback on that, and me and Mr. Henley were talking earlier today that we'll get together here and put together all that and make some adjustments, and then we'll bring that back before the council so they can see what how it washed out after the public comment area.
Councilman Huber.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excuse me. First of all, with reference to the animal ordinance, I've been doing a little bit of work on that also, and I plan on getting together with Councilman Walsh and actually kind of anybody else that's interested in having input on that. Because I think that what's critical is that our current ordinance does need to have some revisions made to it. And in all of the emails that I know all the rest of the members of the council have probably seen, it does seem to me that it's kind of like Senator Enzi always said, that there's what he called the 80% rule. There's about 80% of the content of everything that everyone seems to agree on, and so we'll have to kind of focus on the parts that there's some disagreement on. But I think we can work through that, and I look forward to working on that with everybody. But I think we do need to move forward with that.
Thank you. Councilman Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know this is a rather strange request, but we know that over the years, you used to dial a 900 number and it cost you money, whether you want to pay it or not. Well, over the last year or two, I have noticed a number of calls that are, you might call them orphan calls. They're really not a Wyoming phone number. They might come from Timbuktu. I get them from Greece. This may be a way for us to make some revenue. If there is a way that our phone companies can identify a number that really is a false number, let's charge them for it and we'll split it with them.
Take that down, city manager.
How many 900 numbers have you called, Councilman Hopkins?
Well, I don't recall.
I don't have anything, Your Honor.
Councilman Morgan.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say that I'm happy that staff and council allowed for the opportunity for people to provide feedback on a proposed law or ordinance. It's going to affect the entire community, so I'm glad that we're asking for feedback, and I look forward to how that's going to be incorporated to what's already been proposed.
Thank you. Councilman Humphrey.
Good luck tonight. I voted this morning, by the way.
Thanks. Councilman Laird.
Just a couple things on the dog ordinance. I read all the emails we were getting. There's a lot of people concerned with various things with the ordinance. And then apparently some person that works up there redid the ordinance. I read both of them, and the person who, forget her name, I thought she did a pretty good job. Yes. But I know that we have some work to do on it. A couple things that bother me, Mr. Henley, and I've expressed them to you, is, for instance, this 5-year issue of people being put on probation in a way. I'm concerned with that because the jurisdiction of municipal court is 6 months and $750 fine. And in my humble opinion, I think 5 years goes way beyond the jurisdiction of municipal court. The other thing that's happening, and I didn't realize it until a friend of mine was handling a dog case, and we've raised the fees up there, Mr. Manager, which I agreed with, actually, to raise the fees. I just didn't realize how expensive it could get, and what happens, Mr. Vice Mayor, is you get charged, your dog gets taken, it's somewhere around $60 a day, and so if you then have to go to court and the judge waits 30 days to rule, the 30 days while your dog's sitting there costs you $1,800. And most people, as Mileage pointed out, don't have the money to pay the government a couple $1,000s while they're waiting for an issue to be resolved with their dog. And I think that probably in the ordinance it should that any costs or fine money should be put in abeyance until the case is resolved. Because in this case, I think the law firm had to put up a check, and there was a whole. I know Mr. Henley finally worked it out somehow, but it caused a great deal of problems, and there are people who are condemning this ordinance as being one that's too costly, going to be too costly in terms of fees and fines that the normal person can pay. And what they're saying is that they just won't come and get the dog. They'll just leave the dog there to be euthanized or whatever happens to the dog. So we kind of have to understand that we have people in town who don't have a whole lot of extra money, and it's one thing to punish them for certain kinds of conduct and another thing to just tax and fine them for other kinds of conduct. The other issue is Mr. Henley has put in the ordinance the service dog issue. So I've researched some service dog issues. There's other enlightened communities, for instance, that in addition to the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, which is a federal congressional act which says that if you have certain kinds of disabilities, that you can come on premises if you have a dog that assists you with those disabilities.
And there's nowhere you can get a license for that. So people have been on their own to try to interpret that. And so people say, well, I've got a service dog because, of course, the typical service dog is a trained CNI dog, but the act covers deafness and covers one thing which I have, which is called impaired hearing. And so my little dog is really good, can hear things I can't hear. Actually saved me one night with somebody trying to break into my house. And he's been trained, but I can't go out and get a license to prove this to anybody. And under the act, it's illegal for anyone, including a police officer, to say, well, what disability do you have, Mr. Laird? They can't ask that question by congressional law. And what has happened is the state actually has passed a statute already for service dogs that defines what they are. And it makes it a misdemeanor if you represent that you have a service dog and it isn't a service dog. So there's already a statute which the state has. So for us to deal with service dogs in our ordinance, I think is unnecessary and unwise, because a couple lawyers I've talked to who have done a lot of research on this have a memo about this thick at home. I was going to send it out, but I didn't think anybody would read it anyway. So, but it basically says that with respect to service dogs, it's designed so that people with disabilities feel comfortable going into businesses with the dog that will assist them. Now, there are other states that have expanded that, say to people like Mileage, who the dog is their son. Many people are like that. Or they want to take their dog to visit the two sons buried in the cemetery. And I think we should allow those kinds of things. I think a kind society allows that. The dogs that are the least problem in any community are anything called a service dog. And one reason is they're always leashed. And I agree, the leash, I think the leash law will cure, which we already have, will cure most of these biting problems. The dog, just like I was asking Mileage, if that bulldog would have been leashed or tethered, he would still have his dog. And I walk my dog all the time, and I'm like you are. This person provides all my great dog food for me, which I pay for. And these big dogs are running around our parks. And I saw in one of the emails, the person was suggesting maybe we have the police on bicycle patrol, and I know we're down short of officers, but that's how they catch those dogs. If they're in good weather, there's a bicycle patrol. They'll get people in line with leashing in these public areas in downtown. But service dogs are by people who have different disabilities and different psychological needs to have their dog with them all the time. They don't have dogs that bite people. They're kind, they're trained, and they're on leashes. So I don't think that to now try to redo a federal statute, which I'm not sure has already been preempted federally anyway, and that's another debate I have with Mr. Henley, and then to have an area where it's already illegal to misrepresent a service dog under state law. I would actually truly like to see that removed, Mr. Walsh. In addition to another issue a couple of people mentioned, I think if the car is in motion, I see nothing unlawful or unreasonable about a dog who hangs his head out the window. I texted you about that a couple of weeks ago, and I know you asked me in the meeting if I would consider changing my resolution and adding the thing about the school board, and I did that, but I never got a response from you on it. Would you change that so that the ordinance would just reflect cars that are parked with respect to the dog hanging their head out the window, and allow the dogs or cars that are in motion?
We'll be making several changes. It's not static, presented as the way.
Is that one that's reasonable for you to change?
I think it's perfectly reasonable.
And so how do you feel?
Before we get into a debate about it, if you texted me, I didn't receive it.
Oh, really? I'm sorry.
I'm not interested in that. And let us get this together. A lot of the changes that you're talking about right now will probably be in there what you're looking for. So
Okay, how do you feel about the, taking the service dog issue out?
I disagree with you completely.
Do you have problems with service dogs?
I have problems with reported service dogs that have in fact bit, caused significant damage to people in town, because it's self-reported, so, yeah, that's a problem.
So one issue there?
I don't know how many, I know of one for sure.
Was that dog leashed, or do you know that?
You can depose me later.
Well, no, I'm just I mean, you and your wife are the one that are bringing me the statistics. I'm just asking you to explain it. I'm not trying to irritate you. I'd just like to know.
Let me tell you about the statistics. I had to fill out a Freedom of Information request for that, and I got it from the police department.
Well, however we got it, is there more than one service dog problem?
I have exactly what you saw.
Thank you. I just don't think there's a service dog problem, and to put it in an ordinance, and all I ask you to do is be fair about it. I'm not trying to irritate you, but I think we have to get to the bottom of what we're really trying to do here, and I think it's a good idea to amend these ordinances. But the issue of service dogs, they're the one area of dogs that cause really virtually no problems. But any dog, whether they're a service dog, can bite somebody, which is why I'm in favor totally of the leash law.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd just like to echo Councilman Morgan's comments about the public process. All too often you hear people say, well, it doesn't matter what you say, they're going to do what they're going to do anyway. And the onus is on us with this process, which I have spoken in favor of previously, to take public input and suggestions and consider them all seriously and try to make appropriate revisions before we pass something. So it's the way things should be done. I've already spoken in favor of about the state office building and the importance of that project. I guess I'd also like to note, I happened to be downtown Friday and Saturday night, which isn't typical for me, but I was, and there was a lot of activity. There were no special events going on. The weather wasn't that great, but there were a lot of vehicles down there, and there were a lot of people down there, and we kind of get used to these changes. But if you think back, even 5 years ago, if you went down on a Friday, Saturday night, there was nothing going on in our downtown. And so I know we've taken some criticism from people who made their stand in other portions of our city, but I just think it's very positive, the vibrancy and the life that we see going on in our core. And I think that bodes well for our future. So thank you.
And I don't have anything tonight. I would like to wish everybody that is running good luck. And it's our democracy in action tonight, not only in our community, but our state and our whole country. And so that's the greatest gift that we can have as citizens of the United States. So.
Oh, and congratulations for winning the dance contest.
What? You what?
Yes.
And he collected the most money.
Oh, and the event center tomorrow.
Ribbon cutting, yes. There's a ribbon cutting tomorrow at the event center for the seats. So, yeah, I will be there.
Do you have a replay of your dance routine?
Yes.
It's on Facebook.
Notice of an executive session is to take place today. We have matters to discuss regarding litigation, personnel, and consideration of our land acquisition and consideration of acceptance of gifts, donation, and bequests, which the donor requests in writing to be kept confidential. I have a motion to adjourn from our regular meeting into executive session.
Second.
Moved by Councilman Huber, seconded by Councilman Humphrey. Majority of members present in motion, we move into executive session. Please, vote. Thank you. Sorry.
I'm not doing it.
I've done the people's work.